Does God care about small places? How can we faithfully serve Christ in a rural context? What is the future of the church in rural America? The Rural Ministry Podcast deals with questions like this and much more in the hopes of bringing practical resources and inspiring stories to help the church flourish in rural communities. Dr. Charlie Cotterman is the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and the pastor of a rural church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Join the conversation as we journey into the good things God is doing in small places. All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Rural Ministry Podcast, where we talk about the unique challenges and joys of living and doing ministry in rural places. I'm your host, Garrett Heath, Director of Media and Communications at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Charlie Cotterman. Charlie's the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and the pastor of Oil City Vineyard Church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. So, if you remember a few months ago, we shared some of our initial thoughts on some exciting new data from Lifeway Research that had just come out regarding the rural church in America. You may want to check that episode out as well if you haven't already, but no big deal if you haven't. And as it all turns out, this research was actually a collaborative project from the Rural Church Institute at Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. That's a mouthful, by the way, Jason. we gotta tidy that up.
He's a big deal, man. That's why he's here.
Well, it's so long, but if you use an acronym, no one knows what you're talking about either.
So I know we've got the 22. We get called RHMA a lot.
The next collaborator is the Rural Home Missionary Association, known as RHMA. RHMA.
RHMA is what we usually go with.
And the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College. That's a lot of rural going on there.
A lot of acronyms, a lot of rural.
A lot of words, actually, in general. I don't know if anybody really caught all of that, but three really cool organizations doing good work on the ground, all working together here in this case to, for the betterment really of rural ministry across the country. And I think that's the exciting piece here is just this collaborative effort in looking at this data, sharing each of our perspectives. And I think this is precisely what we're beginning to do here this morning, as we have with us two special guests deeply involved in this project. We have Adam Kipp, who's the Executive Director at RHMA. And
wait, we get called RHMA. RHMA.
Yes, RHMA.
But now I'm going to sound like a jerk because I corrected you
here. Because the H, right? You know, it's the H that gets people. Yeah. How do you say that in the acronym?
RHMA. Like we're like the CIA or the FBI. Like we just do the letters.
That's right.
Not like NASA. I know it's very confusing.
Yeah, it surely is. It surely is. But so Adam Kipp, and then we have Jason McConnell as well, the director of the Rural Church Institute at Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. Is that correct?
That's dead on.
Dead on. Okay. I always get confused with that one too.
Well, there was a name switch a few years back.
I think that's what gets me there. But these names really aren't the important thing this morning, right? It's the data that we're about to dive into, as well as the collaboration that we have going on here. So, Adam and Jason, thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, and I'll just jump in and say a few things. We're off to a really running start this morning, so it can only go up from here. My phone rang, and apparently it's in my Bluetooth speaker, so I didn't hear like half of that conversation. So we're just really doing great. Par for the course here. But I am excited about this because I've kind of had a chance to watch the work of both of these organizations for a while. So I would classify what Wheaton's doing as kind of like the early stage of the newbies to rural ministry stuff. Like it was 2016, 2017, you started hearing about them. It used to be called the Rural Matters Institute. Now they're Rural Church Institute. But really, that was kind of at the beginning of this recent surge in rural effort. And then you have the kind of like wizened, tried and true, been doing it for decades, almost a century, if not a century, maybe, and so it's RHMA. And I would put Village Missions in that. You guys are kind of these folks that have been doing this a long, long time. So I'm super excited that we have both these organizations represented. It's amazing that we get to partner on something. So much of, what it's like. If you're a rural pastor, that there's always a temptation to be competitive with other local churches. The same thing can happen, whatever ministry level you're talking about, like, oh, well, we're the rural ministry people. Oh, no, well, the cool thing is we're working together and we're saying we're better together. So I'm really excited about this. And I want you guys to hear about what they're doing at Wheaton. I want you to hear about what RHMA is doing because it's so good. And I'm also excited about this because these guys are friends. We got to hang out last month in Indianapolis at the Lilly Conference. And I've been, especially Adam, I've been watching what you've been doing a long time at RHMA. So yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation. So let's jump in. Let's just hear from each of you. Maybe give us a snippet, like I'm talking like the micro version of why you're even in this like rural ministry conversation. Like how did God bring you to this? Was it through the pastor? Was it through like, what was your holy discontent maybe? And then tell us about what your organization's doing to help rural pastors and rural churches.
Jason, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, for me, my entry into rural ministry is deeply personal. I was converted in a little rural church, actually in Western Pennsylvania, in the town that I grew up in. I did not grow up in the church, very secular environment, and all of the negative connotations of rural. I have lived those. And so we talk about opioid addiction, alcoholism, broken families, poverty, all of those things. I grew up in a very working class family in what I would actually consider a rural ghetto. Like I won't name the town, but I'll just say that it was affectionately known as the armpit of a certain county in Western Pennsylvania. So it doesn't get any worse than that. And so me growing up, it was just generational sin in my family, and I didn't know anything else. And the quick story is that my best friend was involved in a drunk driving accident and lived like miraculously and started going to church as a result of that accident. And I thought that's so strange because he never went to church either, but he sort of had to give an accounting for what happened to him. And then he invited me to come to church. It was this little rural church. I drove by it every day, never knew anything happened there. 35, maybe 40 people on a Sunday. And I walked in one Sunday morning reluctantly, basically just to get him off my back because his, new believer in Jesus, tons of evangelistic zeal. And he was just a monkey on my back. And I remember making a deal. I said, if I come to church with you once, will you shut up? And he said, yeah, deal. And I thought, okay. And I thought this will satisfy.
Really worked out, huh?
Yeah, I think it worked out okay. And so anyway, I thought this will also satisfy my curiosity about church. I went that one Sunday morning, and it changed my life. And that is not an overstatement. I heard the gospel. I thought the whole sermon was about me. I thought the whole thing was a setup. Like, how did he know I was coming here today? And it was the first time I would say I experienced genuine agape love. Like I'd never seen or experienced anything. And so my commitment to going once turned into every Sunday. And over the next 6 months, I got drunk every Saturday night, but I got up in time to go to church on Sunday morning. And after 6 months, the gospel just became crystal clear, and I made a profession of faith. And my calling to ministry came very soon after that. And it was very clearly a call to rural ministry. And it wasn't until I went to college in Chicago that I realized that my experience was actually kind of an anomaly compared to a lot of others.
Yeah, wow.
So I experienced the megachurch world in Chicago, which really disillusioned me. And I thought, this is not what I think church is. It didn't line up with the scriptures in the same way that I knew my senior pastor per se personally. I mean, he mentored me, and he did that for everyone. And I just thought that, I went to Willow Creek in Chicago, and I didn't know the name of the pastor there. It was Hybels at the time. And I'll never forget this. I went to church with a bunch of friends, and I thought, I wonder if I can be personally mentored and start preaching at this church. And then I walked in and I was like, oh, that's probably not going to happen in a place like this. But I was so neat. And so for me, I'll move this story on quickly. It came back to my conversion, and I wanted to go and get a high level of education and give my life to a rural church and community, just like my pastor had done for me.
Yeah. Wow. That's just such a powerful story. I mean, and it reminds me of some of the stuff that we saw in the research about people coming to know the Lord in these churches. I mean, rural churches are pretty good at introducing people to Jesus, as your story shows. So that's amazing. Very cool. Well, Adam, let's hear a little bit of your story, and then we're going to talk about the organizations briefly, kind of what your work's doing right now. So how'd you get into your position, and how'd God bring you there?
Sure. So I ended up in rural ministry, kind of the opposite of Jason. So I grew up outside Columbus, Ohio, in the suburbs there. And I grew up at a larger church there, maybe 500 or 600 people. I got my undergrad at The Ohio State University, which is one of the largest public institutions that there is. And then I went and got my degree down in Dallas, again, another very large city here in the United States. So lots of city and suburban experience for me. But then I experienced something that actually happens to a lot of pastors. I went to go back to the church I grew up in, and they were like, we're full. We have a lead pastor. We have an associate pastor. We've got a youth pastor. We've got a kids pastor. Can you play music? I said, no. Well, then we don't need you. That's the only pastor we still need. We need a worship pastor. So what was I going to do? Like, where do I go to find a pastorate if I can't go to the church I grew up in? So I went on to the school job boards, and I found out, man, there's not a lot of mega churches that are looking for a pastor they don't know with little to no pastoral experience. But do you know who is willing to give a chance to pastors with little to no pastoral experience that they don't know? Small churches. And so I applied, and I accepted a pastorate up here in central Illinois, in Washington, Illinois. And I can remember when we came here and we got off the interstate and we're driving to the church, it's just like, man, there's a lot of cornfields. Like, how much longer? I'll make the drive today and it feels like nothing at all. But back then it felt like hours just driving through fields after fields to get to this little church that looked out on a cornfield or sometimes a bean field. And so I had 15 great years of serving the kingdom there. And that's how I ended up in rural ministry. So I didn't grow up there, but the Lord certainly called me there.
Yeah. Wow. I love how those stories actually work together, and honestly, I know some of the stuff we're going to talk about in a few minutes is about how people get called to rural ministry. And so this is going to inform that conversation, but I'm giving you, some anticipation here, folks. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about the organizations you lead. Like, how are your organizations trying to come alongside rural churches, pastors? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So the Rural Church Institute at Wheaton College Billy Graham Center, it almost sounds like an oxymoron, because if anyone knows Wheaton, it is like the quintessential suburban community. It is nothing rural about it at all. It's a bedroom community, lots of houses with a big Christian college right in the middle of the whole thing. And so, and I often get that response, like, rural at Wheaton, like, that doesn't even make any sense. And in some ways it doesn't, although Ed Stetzer had the vision for this a number of years ago, I think somewhere in the 2015-16 range. And really, he was the impetus behind getting this institute off the ground. And so we're one of 9 institutes at the Billy Graham Center. They do lots of other things with churches in Africa, African American churches, evangelism, all sorts of things. And so we're one of those. And our specific mission really is to come alongside rural pastors, rural congregations, and to equip them. And in the Billy Graham Center, our sort of niche is evangelism. After all, it's named after Billy Graham. And so some of the things that we're doing is we have rural evangelism cohorts where we work with churches all across the country. It's our specialty of really helping to raise the evangelistic temperature of all churches. But my job is to take sort of the curriculum that has been developed at Wheaton College and contextualize that for rural. And so in some ways, evangelism in rural communities is like evangelism everywhere else. It's the same gospel, it's the same message, it's the same power for transformation of lives. And yet, we all know, if you've been in ministry for a little while, that everything has to be contextual as well. And so that curriculum was really built on a suburban model for suburban churches. And so I'm working with our team here and the pastors that we have going through that initiative right now. I'm contextualizing it and teaching it, and they're putting it to use. And so we're seeing some good fruit from that already. In addition to that, we also know that, as an academic institution, we have a little bit of bandwidth to do some research and writing. And so we're working to produce some resources. And so we actually have several book initiatives going on right now by myself and Adam Kipp, and actually not you, Charlie, but Adam Loretto from the
one of our team members here. Yeah,
Center for Rural Ministry. So that's one that we're just getting off the ground, but we have several other with some of our advisory council members, Glenn Damon and Ron Clausen, actually Adam's predecessor. And so anyway, we're kind of excited about some of these things that are happening. And then we're doing, this is one of the other things, is rural advocacy. And so I've already, in my role as director, only 2.5 months in, by the way, after pastoring two rural churches in northern Illinois for 22 years. So interesting, 22 years in parish ministry, now 2 months at Wheaton. So it's two different worlds. But I have the opportunity to go to other ministry organizations that just they're oblivious to what's happening in rural churches in rural America. For instance, I was at the Luis Palau Evangelistic Association. Big national evangelism organization, and they asked me to come and talk about rural ministry and what's happening on the ground. So I'm able to advocate for rural ministry from my role at Wheaton. So those are some pretty important initiatives that we have going on.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that last point, especially, one of the things I'm convinced about is that in so many rural pastors, rural leaders, even within their denomination, are kind of not seen and not platformed. And I think one of the things all of our organizations are trying to do is change that, to say, like, we have amazing leaders. We have amazing things happening in small places, and we want to tell you about it. We want to advocate for that. And we want to kind of catch the ear of folks that wouldn't maybe be listening in those places and say, check out this story. So I think, Wheaton's ability to do that with some of these evangelistic organizations, just because of the history with Billy Graham Center, is such a great opportunity God's given you guys to advocate in those spaces. So that encourages me a ton. Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about Rural Home Missionary Association?
Sure. RHMA was started way back in 1942. So we have been around for quite some time. And it was started in response really to World War II. Okay. As there was this uptick in an industrialization effort, they were calling people to leave the countrysides and come into the city.
Yeah.
And so that was certainly happening here in Illinois, and people were just being absorbed up into the Chicagoland area. And what our founder, C.J. Redeker, noticed is that it was leaving a vacuum in these rural places.
Interesting.
Not just a vacuum in terms of the towns, but the spiritual wellness of the towns as well. And he had a heart to love and serve and invest in those communities. And he knew that it couldn't just be with a vacation Bible school program or a one-off thing where you kind of came in and left. That he understood rural communities and knew that you were going to need somebody that could live there, could be a part of that community, and could pour back for the kingdom of heaven. And so we started as a missionary organization, sending missionaries not overseas, but into rural and small places here in the United States where there really is no gospel teaching church. And so we've been doing that for decades now. And when we talk about that for us, because every rural organization has to define rural differently.
Sure.
For us, when we talk about this work we're doing, we're looking for towns of 5,000 or less that have no other gospel teaching witness there. So we're looking to send missionaries in that way. And sometimes there's a single church there that is that gospel witness that's struggling. And so that missionary can go as a pastor and partner with that church and help them to get healthy and well and help the gospel to be going forth in that way. And then hopefully that church can stand on its own and that missionary can go to help somebody else. Sometimes, and there's more of these communities than we'd like to admit in our country, there's no gospel witness at all, not a single church in a town of maybe 750 or 1,000. And those people have to go to another community if they want to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
And we believe every community should be able to have a healthy gospel teaching church. And so
Amen.
we can send missionary church planters to go into those communities and begin to establish new churches, again, that can proclaim the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sins. So that's what we've been doing for quite some time. And so we partner with people in that way. And if any of your listeners were interested in going to a small community and serving as a pastor that way and saying, oh, I'd love to, but again, that church is so small, they couldn't afford for my family and I to make a living, even bivocationally, I don't know how I'd make it work.
Yep.
That's where we as a missions organization come in. We can help people raise the funds so that they can come and be devoted to serving that community and be there, a place they probably couldn't otherwise be.
Wow. That's such a great call. I mean, how do people get in touch with your organization if they are in that position?
Oh, absolutely. Info@rhma.org, or you can go to our website, rhma.org, and you can contact us or reach out. So that's what we've been doing for the longest amount of time. But then in the 90s, RHMA realized, hey, we've been doing this through our missionaries and through the communities we're connected with, but there's a larger need in rural America than just our scope. And so they took the conference we were putting on for our missionaries every year and having like speakers like Warren Wiersbe come in and talk to our missionary family and opened it up to all sorts of rural pastors. And so that was really the start of our larger rural ministry conference. Mm-hmm. And that's something we've been doing for a number of decades as well. And it's really exciting. So we host one every spring in Morton, Illinois. And then we host one yearly out east as well, sometimes in Lancaster. I believe our next one's going to be in New Haven this coming fall. So we have these opportunities for rural pastors to come together, to be at a conference that is by small town pastors for small town pastors. There's nothing like going to a conference and hearing somebody talk about, like, this is how you organize your worship team, and this is how you do your outreach, and this is how you work with the person that sets up your webpage, and you're like, I'm all of those people, and I don't have the time or capacity to do it. And you almost leave feeling like a failure. Like, and it's not the intent of those conferences for small town pastors to feel that way, but they just feel kind of like fish out of water. So we have a conference where, no, you feel like you are with people that get you and that understand you and that want to pour into you. And so our goal is to equip, encourage, and edify rural and small town pastors. And so we love doing that through our conference ministry. And then out of that, because the RHMA continued to grow, we have education ministries as well. So we have master's degree classes and online classes we offer in partnership with Dallas Theological Seminary. We've got a rural D-Min cohort that's starting up this summer. Cool. So if there's any of those rural guys, and I know we're all big advocates of this, to continue your education, to grow, to develop those skills, because we need people writing, we need people publishing from a rural background. We're trying to be a part of that as well.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I love how you're just in very practical ways empowering people to go to small communities, empowering people to tell the stories. I just wanted to make one quick observation. Then we are going to get to the research for our last 10, 15 minutes. What's fascinating, I had never thought about this till I had you guys here together telling your stories, is that like both of these organizations are actually birthed out of this 1940s-ish, 50s-ish Cold War, World War II, post-World War II. Like Billy Graham's getting going in 49. And he is building in that World War II, kind of post-World War II, build big things, right? And like he's doing these mass things. And then your organization is like, well, all these mass things are happening in the city. Let's do some small things locally.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating how those things work together. And the other thing that I just want to point out, because sometimes I think this is lost on us, we live in a world where everyone's trying to build their individual platform. But what you guys are part of is an institution that has longevity because people generations back invested in things. Whether it's Billy Graham and then the center there, or RHMA. And so I'm just going to just put in a good word. Sometimes institutional is like a bad word. We think, oh, that's so, no, like we need strong, healthy institutions that are being led by the Spirit of God, because how are people going to publish books? How are people going to get degrees and things like this if we don't have institutions leading the way? So props to you all for leading your institutions well, and may God bless those institutions. It's good stuff. All right. Speaking of good stuff, let's get into some of the work that our institutions together partnered on. And Adam, I'm going to give it to you first, because I've seen some of your thoughts on this, and I just want to hear you kind of talk about what stood out to you. I mean, this was, 1,000 pastors were called, over 1,000 pastors. There's a lot to dig through, but we just kind of asked you guys to highlight a couple of things that you wanted to talk about today. So, Adam, I'll give you the mic first.
Yeah. So one of the neat things about this is not only did we get to ask these questions of 1,000 pastors, but as we reach out and talk to 1,000 pastors in communities of 10,000 or less, it does give us a picture of what pastors look like in rural and small town America. And just some really neat things stood out to me about that. For instance, only 40% of rural and small town pastors grew up in a rural or small town context. So back up. 60% grew up, 40% did not grow up in a rural and small town context. So there's plenty of people like me that grew up in the suburbs or in an urban context that God is calling to serve in small places. Or when you looked at education, 46% didn't have an MDiv or a THM, and 21%. So that's like 1 in 5 doesn't even have college education. But God is using those people
Amen.
to serve well in rural and small town places. Or even like looking at the age ranges. That was interesting to me too. So you've got 27% under 44, but also 27% over 65. So you got young people coming in, but you've got a large amount of seniors that are continuing to serve well in rural. And again, more than a quarter of the rural and small town pastors are over retirement age. They're 65 wow. plus. But wow. For me, what's fun, because I've got an engineering background, so I like looking at numbers and then like digging down into the weeds. So you look at like all of this vast variety of different people from different backgrounds and different contexts. And then you compare their answers to some of these questions, especially when we asked about like, hey, are you seeing signs of success in your ministry context? Mm-hmm. Are you seeing new commitments to Christ? Are you seeing members showing care? Are you seeing people stepping into leadership? Are you feeling like you're becoming a part of your rural and small town community? And when we compare those things, what's amazing is God uses all sorts of different people to serve him in rural and small town America. You don't see like, oh, well, you know what, the people that have more education, they're seeing more signs of success. You don't see, oh, the people that grew up rural, they're becoming a part of the community, but people that didn't, no, they're not. You don't see, oh, hey, older people, they're able to get people to step into leadership, but younger people aren't. Instead, what we see is that there is no discernible difference between all these different varied contexts and the success that people are seeing in rural and small town ministry, which means that God can and does use all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds to serve him in rural and small town America. And that's so important because I think some people say, I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have a degree. I can't do this. I'm not from a rural place, so why would I ever go there? This research pushes back on all of that to say, hey, there's no excuse. If God is calling you, he can and will use you for his benefit and for his kingdom work in rural America.
Yeah. Oh, man. That is good stuff, Adam. I mean, like, there are not that many other contexts where, we're going to see that wide of a range where you can have someone, that doesn't have even a college degree, but a church says, we see something in you, and there's not all these hoops to jump through to let you start stepping into that leadership. I mean, that feels really like kingdom minded to me. The other thing, and this gets at your first stat you mentioned, that 40% didn't grow up in rural America. Because we have this thought like, well, maybe a rural person would go back, but no one that's seen beyond rural would ever go back to that small place. And you're saying, no, actually, almost half, 40% didn't even grow up there. And then the interesting thing is, if you dig in, I remember this from the research that, like, some of the people are choosing rural because they feel a special call to it, kind of like what Jason said. He just knew, but then there's the folks that say, no, this church was open. This church called me. I felt called to this local church, and it was in a rural place. But here's the thing. When you're in that place, you can learn to love it. You can learn to know its stories. And so, man, I don't really care how people get to small towns, but I care that they're there, and I care that God's using them and Spirit's in them. No, that's good stuff. Jason, what about you? What stood out to you when you looked at this research?
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of things, and I know, Adam and Charlie and Adam Loretto at Grove City. We've been batting this around a lot over the last couple months since this came out, and a number of surprises in area. For instance, that it was a lower percentage of people who felt called to rural ministry that are actually there. That was a little bit of a surprise for me. So even listening to the two of you unpack that a little bit, because my experience is that I'm from, grew up in rural and just always felt compelled by that. And so also some of the evangelism stats were, I think, maybe a little bit better than I thought they might come back. And so I've been thinking about all of those things, but the one I wanted to focus on today was actually the one that did not surprise me at all. And it was really on this whole idea of success and how do we define success in rural ministry. And I do find that this is a world of difference from our urban and suburban counterparts. And so when we looked at what we saw in the data, almost all of the success that's perceived by rural pastors is relational. It's highly relational. And that's why when I teach rural ministry, I talk about, rural values. And one of the key ones that I've studied sociologically over the years is this idea of relationship over reality. And the suburbs is almost the exact opposite. And why is this the case? Because if you go back to the definition of what is rural communities are largely defined by generational ties to the land. And so you have people that have been there generationally forever. And that could be agricultural farms that get passed down generation to generation. I mean, in agricultural communities, you even hear a little bit of bragging like, oh, we're a seventh generation family farm. And actually in Western PA, where I grew up, it was the same way with coal mining. Like I'm the first generation in my family that's not mining coal, and they remind me of that all the time. Like, oh yeah, you're off in some institution, pushing pencils. You're not doing real man's work. And so I've broken the mold a little bit. And so there's a lot of pride that comes with that. Also, rural communities are built around extended family networks. And so like where I've been pastoring here in Vermont, I mean, I'm looking out my window right now and, there's the brother or his brother lives right up the street and his mother lives right there, like in these kind of family compounds. And so life is defined relationally. In the suburbs, it's totally different. Like no one grew up there. Everyone moved there for a job or for education. They live in a subdivision and there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. But there's no real roots or historical ties to it. And the way you build relationships is through, things at school with your kids or things through work. It's not through, again, you can go to most rural churches and, we went to elementary school together and then high school, we played on the same football team. And there's so much life that's been lived together. And so when we look at success in ministry, this is the way rural pastors, rural churches define it. And so I always laugh, and here I am at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center, where we're constantly counting conversions. And so where I push back on some of my colleagues that are more suburban minded. And so, for instance, a couple from the research itself, signs of success, 98% said members showing care. It was the number one indicator of success. Not that new commitments to Christ are important. Actually, 93% said that that's a marker of success as well. So it's not diminished, but it's not number one either. And then I find it interesting, only 77% said attendance growth.
Mm.
That'll cause our suburban friends to just like go crazy. Like, what?
Yeah.
How can it be so low? But the reality is that it comes back to what's happening in those relationships. And even in the next slide on this idea of success, where it's actually measuring, like, how is your church doing in these areas? 97% of the pastors interviewed said that their members actually are showing care.
Mm.
That's really high,
Yeah.
and I think really positive. Also, members who are consistently present, 90%.
Yeah.
That's very different than sort of your trendy mega church where there's a big front door, but also a big back door, and you don't know who's there on any given week. So, and I just find that I think that's right. That success is defined relationally. It's how many, even when we talk about evangelism in a rural community, like, you can't treat people like commodities or you're never going to get very far. Like, you just can't do that. You have to build a long-term credibility relationship if you're going to talk to anybody. And it's not just about the gospel, but it's everything in life. And so
you get to know their story.
This was exactly in some of the qualitative data. We haven't talked a whole lot about that yet, but I'm really excited to dig into that.
That's what the book's for, Jason. You guys are going to unpack all those. I printed off. It's like this wide, guys. It was like inches wide. So you guys work through that, write it in the book, and we'll read it.
Oh yeah, I think that's way more interesting to read about than statistics. I think statistics are, unlike my Ohio State engineering friend right here. I love the narrative. I love the drama. I get bored with stats and numbers. So we're going to make a good team and balance each other out.
That's right.
But some qualitative, one of the themes was love and care for neighbors is gospel living. And I think that's absolutely correct, that in rural communities, it's not just about gospel proclamation, it's about gospel living. Because if you're not living it, you live in a fishbowl. Everyone knows your business.
Yep.
And if you're not living it, then there's no way you're going to proclaim it. And so I find that that's very important. One of the outreach activities are not expected to yield direct conversions. They're expected to start new relationships. And so that's one of the findings from the qualitative data. And that just affirms my own experience being a rural pastor for 2.5 decades, is that, you can do programs, you can do events, you can do outreach initiatives, all of those things. But that's not where you're going to find the tangible sort of transformation happening. Those are starting points. But it's as those relationships develop and people get integrated into the life of the church, and the church gets integrated into the life of the community. That's where, and this isn't a theological word, but I'll use it anyway, that's where the magic happens.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's so good. And being a rural, I'm pretty much lived in rural America my entire life, barring like 5 years. And, I've now been pastoring in a small town church for about almost 10 years. And I 100% agree with what you're saying. And the funny thing is, we hear people always talk about, like, I want to get back to, like, the Acts 2 church. I want to get back to, like, what it was doing. And one of the things they were doing was caring for each other really well. And we're saying, like, rural churches are really good at that. They're really good at doing that, and they really value it. One of the things that I saw that's kind of related to this was that idea of 89% of rural pastors believe being present in people's lives is more effective ministry than having good church programs, right? And I think there's something so relational about that, that just you see people at the football game or the basketball game. You go shop in the local store. You see people in the aisle of Walmart, and you end up talking to them. Like, this is how ministry happens in so many rural communities. So, man, there's so much here. For the sake of time, I'm going to just ask you guys to give me one last kind of nugget or something to whet our kind of anticipation for the book that you're working on. We'll have to circle back around as this project continues. But if you could leave us with a word, maybe it's an encouragement for rural pastors, maybe it's one thing from the research that you just want to say, I just want to leave this hanging, but we're going to talk about it more. What would be your word today that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I'll jump out at that. So we're still in the very beginning genesis of this project, but I think we have a working title that I'm pretty excited about: Rural Ministry, Resilience, and Renewal. And I love both of those words because I think it really does capture what we're seeing in the research, this idea of resilience. And so rural ministry is, it never has, and I doubt if it ever will be on the, a mega platform.
Sure.
But that's okay. As pastors, as congregations, as people who live in rural communities, maintain resilience over the long haul. I mean, this is what we've seen with the Christian church over 2,000 years. That it's there, it's not always front and center, but the Holy Spirit's doing the work behind the scenes. And then also this idea of renewal. And so in every generation, we see God working in different ways. And so I think, one of the things from the research is the optimism that rural pastors are facing.
Yeah.
I mean, that was also a staggering, I think that the sort of narrative that gets told out there is that, rural pastors, have poor self-image and churches are ingrown and, all of these types of wah, wah, wah. And yet, it was like something close to 90% of rural pastors feel that their church is going to be better in 10 years than it is now. And I'm like, that'll preach. And I think that actually supports a lot of the optimism when I work with rural pastors. They're like, hey, there's a bright hope. And largely because Jesus Christ is the king. And so, if it just depends on us, if it just depends on what happens in rural America, then there may not be quite as much hope. But because we serve King Jesus, who is the king of all of his churches, I think there's a great reason to be optimistic. So resilience and renewal. I'm looking forward to digging into both of those.
That's good. That's good. You whetted my appetite. I'll tell you that. So Adam, tell us what do you want to leave us with today?
Sure. Just piggybacking off of what Jason said about how relational rural communities are. I think that's so true. But also when we talked to pastors and we said, hey, what's your number one personal struggle that you've got? It was carrying the weight and the burden that others have. And then when we asked about other struggles, 1 in 4, about 26% said loneliness. So you've got this interesting thing where you are in a very relational context and lots of people. In fact, a vast majority of pastors said that they had a close personal friend, I think 92%. But there's still something about pastoral ministry that's hard, that's isolating, that makes you feel kind of alone. And while that part is a difficult thing, I think what's really neat about what's happening now is that you don't have to go alone, right? I mean, we've got all sorts of great institutions that are coming to the forefront, but their whole purpose is to encourage and equip and help and support those in rural ministry, whether that's the Billy Graham Center, whether that's the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City, whether that's RHMA, and there's more even beyond us. Like, if you're listening to this, you don't have to go it alone. Right. There's lots of groups out here that want to help you if you're willing to reach out for that help, if you're willing to make some time to listen to a podcast, to go to a conference, to be a part of a cohort. There's so much support out here for rural pastors, way more than I think there ever has been in the last 100 years.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's such a good word. I so appreciate how you guys wrap that up because you can sense the optimism and yet you can say, but there are these things and we need to dig in more because there is something about loneliness. And is it different in rural areas? Is just being a pastor anywhere lonely? Probably yes, for certain reasons. But is there something different about being a rural pastor where you are in that fishbowl? Where, is there something different? So that's why we need people to write books. We need people to do good research. And we're trying to be a part of that. And if you're listening, there's room. So do good work and tell us about it. We'd love to hear. I think that's all we have. Garrett, will you land this plane for us?
I'll try. First, I just want to say thanks for, the insight from both of you. I really appreciate the unique perspectives that you both bring from your own stories and journeys too. And I think I speak for all of us, when I say that I'm looking forward to seeing what this collaboration brings, moving down the road here. So thank you. That's a wrap, I think, for this week's episode. We hope this conversation has provided you as a listener with some encouragement, definitely some insight here today, maybe even a practical idea for your own ministry context. The Rural Ministry Podcast is part of the good work being done at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College. If you found this podcast helpful, there are a few free things you can do to help us out. First, you can share this episode with a friend or colleague who could benefit from it. Second, you can leave us a review on your favorite platform. This helps more people discover our show. And lastly, you can leave us a comment or suggestion on the episode page over at the Center for Rural Ministry YouTube channel. We hope to get some good conversations started over there as well. Thanks again for listening, and you can learn more about our mission by visiting www.ruralministry.org. Have a great week.